Hi, Nate.
Hey, Tom.
I'm just sitting here about to record an episode with you. Again, it's Tom.
I'm
Looking
confused.
forward to our episode.
Is this some cultural reference that I'm totally abashed of?
Possibly. This was Doug's intro to his speech at the DNC. So his first blind date with Kamala, he left an awkward voicemail where he said like, "Hey, it's Doug. Just on my way to a morning meeting."
I don't
Again,
even know who
it's
Doug is
Doug.
in this context.
Do you know who Kamala Harris is?
Yeah,
He's her husband.
that makes sense.
The second gentleman.
Welcome to our culture corner on the retort, where I don't know most basic things about who people are. As you can see, there's a bit of a summer break going on here. I think Tom and I were naturally finding our cadence for what we wanted to do as we kind of got the legs underneath us doing this. And then some natural vacationing and rest kind of came in the way of a few episodes, which is not something that we take too harshly. I think is good. I was totally off the grid for a few days in Banff most recently. Tom mentioned he was on vacation. And just coming back to the AI world, that's like, and everyone calling it now is like a few slow weeks. I think some people are just like, oh, not that much is happening. But even coming back to it with fresh eyes is like, this is unsustainable. And some of the discourses around it are just they're just visceral reactions to how everyone is kind of setting themselves up for the fall. I think everyone is already kind of locked in, expecting September and October to be very busy, based purely on these kind of rumors and normal trends in tech. And it's just, I don't know. I see this, it's been going on for so long. I've seen this so many times of people just, the race dynamic and people burning them out. And my biggest theme is that there's going to be so much more of like, oh, the next model generation is going to be the one that gets us what we need. And just people are just going to push them further into the burnout corner than they ever have before. But I don't really think that there's an exponential takeoff.
Let's talk about vacation a little bit. Also, you and I just haven't spoken in a while. It's also a chance for us to catch up. Yeah. So you were in Canada? Is that right?
Yeah. So Banff is the national park in Canada that's known for the teal lakes. Essentially, these lakes are formed by glacial dirt runoff, and the dirt in the glaciers gets pulverized into a very, very fine dirt. And then that sediment runs into these lakes, the alpine lakes, and creates the teal color. And especially when the sun is out, it is exactly what the photos look like. I mean, like, of course, people edit the photos, but they are just a very bright teal lake in the mountains. And I understand why it is a popular national park. But I was in the backcountry for a couple days with my parents doing definitely glamping in the backcountry. So no access, no crowds, and just kind of full no internet, screens are just for taking photos type of life for a few days, which is very needed. The last time I was going to do this was going to be backpacking, I think in 2022, but it got smoked out. So it's been a few years. I did another backpacking trip in 2023, but I don't feel like it felt the same level of unplugging. Probably because I'm more plugged in now than I was at that time.
How long were you unplugged?
It's only like 55 hours or something. It's not even 3 days. I was doing the math on my head. I was like, how long have I actually been off the grid here? And at the same time, I have recently read the Anxious Generation book, where I listened to it, which is this book about how people's brain, like especially children's brains, are being manipulated by these algorithms. And
sure. Yeah.
I think that it's a fun book for people to read because you think that you're just learning about children, but I think most of us have the same things that you're looking for as signs of kind of mentally distortion in kids. And it's like, okay, if you're self-aware enough, you should be like, okay, this is a problem that we all have. And then I've started to spin my wheels on my brain about how AI will make this worse. I think it's a common refrain of like AI blurring the boundary between algorithms and relationships. And we haven't really opened this door to algorithmic relationships, which I think is good. Not even just like romantic, but any friendship that's algorithmic could be so manipulative in a way that we don't see. So,
Yeah, The Anxious Generation, I've not personally read it. I've read a lot about it. I've listened to a lot of interviews with Haidt. Haidt's work is something I know pretty well because he was pretty core to my qualifying exam at Berkeley. One of my fields was moral cognition, and
yeah.
he's an academic really, and his most famous original work was on there's a famous paper called, I believe, The Emotional Dog and Its Rational Tail, by
Wow,
Haidt,
a great
where
title.
he argued, his argument was, up until that point, the assumption in psychology was that when you show people moral dilemmas and they're trying to think through them, the argument was, and the consensus in the literature was, that moral cognition was a function of abstract reasoning. And basically your ability to do that at greater and greater levels of sophistication. And so there were some canonical thinkers, developmental thinkers, and also subsequent folks who were arguing along those lines. Haidt flipped it and said, basically, if I remember correctly, our listeners might correct us, regardless of how old you are, regardless of how supposedly mature you are, the overwhelming number of moral judgments and feelings that you make are intuitive, emotional, not rational, really at all. And we only really deploy rationality when we're trying to sort of rationalize those moral judgments that we make. And that was what put him on the map originally, is my understanding. And he's kind of, in many ways, funneled.
I'm guessing this led into The Righteous Mind.
Yes.
That's so another work of his that I've read.
Because moral foundations theory was sort of the more mature edifice out of that, which was this idea that there are specific kind of continents, I think is the metaphor that's used there, of like where these moral intuitions come from. And then also on top of that, and this is maybe not so surprising, that there's a lot of partisan polarities about which of those continents are like deserving of priority or how they're related to each other and things like that. But the common denominator is that we're in many ways, like emotional dogs or monkeys in terms of where our moral sentiments come from. But then it's interesting because now this is where you mentioned it, he's really become a very prominent public figure in how we're now evaluating what some people have provocatively called, I don't know if I would call it this, but some have used the term moral panic to describe, what screens and algorithms and whatnot are doing.
He describes this in the conclusion of the book, is that his original intention of the book was to write something about how algorithms are breaking our democracy. And this part of the first chapter of The Anxious Generation was supposed to be like a chapter in that book. And then he was like, this is far more urgent, and wrote that. I don't know if I would describe it as a moral panic, but I just see it as like a way that a challenge that is very hard for society to address because it takes collective action on something that people are very protective of, being their kids. So like, it's a very hard policy problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I guess and the reason you brought it up, and I didn't say my side of it yet, is that, I mean, right now, you and I are a bit older than the Zoomers, who are really the kind of object of focus, I think, in most of that book. But like the way we deal with this right now, that's, I think, healthy, but maybe not sufficient, is we unplug for a little while. We set boundaries. So yeah, you were off the grid for, you said 55 hours. I went with my wife to North Carolina. We just got an Airbnb there. So we were not really in any kind of meaningful sense, like forcibly off the grid, but I did delete things from my phone. So
yeah, I think if you're taking a vacation with people that are close to you, taking as many steps as possible to forcibly remove yourself from some types of the technology is very useful. I think the things like a lot of people in the space will advocate for like 1 day a week with no technology and things. And I don't think you have to make it that strict, but doing steps in that direction will help.
It depends on if you're an Orthodox Jew or not, I guess. We don't know what a day of rest means in our world. But yeah, I mean, certainly for the last year, I have not really been active much at all on Twitter. I do go onto LinkedIn, fairly frequently. my experience of Twitter. This was sort of at the height last summer of like the safety versus ethics kind of zeitgeist bubbling over, and I just couldn't take it anymore, and so I basically just left it. And it doesn't seem to have gotten any better in the meantime, is my sense. You're much more, in it than I am.
It hasn't gotten better. It's the same. It's a static kind of mess. What is interesting, I think, is that more people have started using Substack for what you use LinkedIn for, which is just like short posts, very direct relationships with people, and just kind of distribute as you need. I think that the LinkedIn is becoming somewhat like Twitter in my mind. It's just like kind of a mess. And Substack has it's just earlier on the cycle where eventually I'm sure it'll have its own form of strange, but for now it's okay. Relating to going back a step on this Jonathan Haidt discussion, why are so many modern philosophers obsessed with AGI? Or is this because, like, I follow the Dwarkesh podcast and he has all these people on and they just go so deep on like how the super intelligent AGIs are going to distort how we think and how people are going to be susceptible to their really precise, powerful reasoning and fine tuning. And I'm just like, how do so many people get incepted by this? I know we've talked about rationality a lot on and offline, and I talked with Michael Dennis more at the RL conference, which I was at in Amherst, Mass, which was very good. The small conferences are good ways to connect with people. And I just don't understand how so many people get this kind of AGI brain and no grounding in reality. Like, yes, I could come up with fictional scenarios, but it's just like, it's years into this, it still washes over me as confusion.
You and I have touched on parts of it before. My perspective on this, it's worth keeping a few things in mind. I mean, I guess I'm a philosopher. I guess I would put myself in that bucket. But I'm not somebody who really keeps myself up at night about things with respect to AGI. I think that it's a function of a few different things. I think it's a function of certain ideas and assumptions at the heart of computer science as a discipline about what rationality is and what agents are and whatnot that are arguably now coming to a head because a certain paradigm is breaking, because we're really now deploying things that feel agentic and certainly can learn at scale. And so we're questioning what are the limits of that. And if you've really drunk the Kool-Aid in terms of how the discipline thinks about rationality, you're going to spin up into that world pretty quickly or have to continuously remind yourself not to. I think that's part of it. I think another part of it, though, is I don't feel like, I mean, you said most people, we're really like a vanishingly small like number of like normies I really don't think are in this headspace. They might be anxious. Again, they might be like motivated by moral judgments and like the height sense. They might feel things about it. Certainly pop culture, there's a lot of AI stuff in movies and shows and books, right? I'm actually finally reading The Food Body Problem. So
nice.
I'm like percolating into this stuff. It's interesting. Yeah, so like there is a zeitgeist component of this, but I think you're really getting lost from your moral grounding if you spend, I'm just going to say something like more than a third of your day thinking about this specific type of thought experiment, because we're just not in a position to deliberate about it yet. I don't think. I still don't think that we are.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I mean, that's why it's like off-putting. It's like, why are we starting with? Like, there's a podcast. Some podcasts like start, and it's immediately an AGI question, and I'm like, this makes no sense. So I don't know. That's not really something I want to go too deep into. There's just a lot of weird discourses happening online. And
have timelines changed?
I mean, everyone always says a few years. It's like the perfect time to say something that's coming soon, but not soon enough that it's like obvious. But I even think the timelines are grounded in things that don't make that much sense. So the timelines are grounded in like things that are hard to measure most of the time.
So I guess that's what I'm getting at, is that these timelines and the fixation on it is rooted in assumptions that are often unconscious, and when you make yourself aware of them, they kind of look a bit ridiculous when you expose them to scrutiny.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's something that I don't really know how to fight. It's where we're at. I know.
Are you struggling with it yourself? You're like,
I just see it, and I'm like, how do people not get turned off by this? There's just there is a lot of people in this. So I've also taught the whole SB 1047 bill is coming to pass. Not that the bill is likely to pass. I think, given that Nancy Pelosi came out against it directly, Newsom is probably going to just veto it. I don't think that's a political battle that is worth their time, but we don't have certainty on it. But one of those, the Subsecretary Dean Ball, who I've talked to multiple times, and they're writing a Substack that I think is reasonable in AI policy, is definitely somewhat aligned with my takes. But I think he's at least filling a niche that wasn't there, is getting very clear attacks from effective altruists or messages that he's the reason this bill got nuked. And I'm like, what are these people? This guy has 1,500 followers. It's like those five. That's not how the world works, and that's another.
No, it's not.
Rendition of what has seen a lot. So
I
think
that it still strikes me as astrology, frankly, 90% of this, which is look, a lot of people read astrology. A lot of people look up their horoscopes. Most people who do that don't do it because they really believe that this thing is able to predict what their day will be like or their next month will be like. They do it just because that's interesting. They're bored, and it's a form of entertainment. And, you're talking about basically podcasts that are talking about this stuff. I would be skeptical of the integrity of many of the intuitions that guide that stuff. I think it's probably mostly about vibes and staying ahead of the audience is my guess.
Yeah, because on the other side, we talked about the safety ethics thing. I think that AI ethics community is actually flushing some of its previous toxins. I was thinking about writing a piece. I was trying to write a piece that was what happened to AI ethics, and I was kind of shopping it around with people that I know in the fact community that I respect. And it seems like a few things have happened where it came to a front that the kind of Timnick and co has removed themselves from fact because they weren't okay with some decisions that fact was making. So now the DARE community is no longer directly involved in fact, and they've kind of updated their funding. So I think that, and they welcome more AI safety work, what previously be called AI safety technical work, in fact. So I think updating the funding of the conference, getting some of those headaches out, making it clear that they're not equal to the DARE Timnit vibe and the Emily Bender vibe. I think that would really help them. It just takes so long to come over kind of cultural, what everyone else in the field thought you were. So I still want to finish writing this piece because I think ultimately language modeling teams should have people like that because they're technical people trying to make interventions for meaningful safety. It's just so hard to overcome what people think you are versus what you're actually doing.
So, yeah, I'm not sure if I've said this on the pod yet. I think it's worth maybe me just saying it briefly. It could be, feels like the right moment to do it. So obviously I was in an AI safety lab in grad school, as we've discussed, a little bit. For years, for actually several years. And, I don't know if I was a convert to many of the perspectives there, but I learned a lot. And I went from that lab intentionally into a postdoc at one of the leading sort of so-called ethics labs, in the kind of academic side of things anyway. I would also say that my experience there was that I was not converted to the perspective or many of the kind of animosities that animate the other side of things, but I also learned a lot, from the perspective, and I was going to fact and stuff like that. And at the absolute height of this, which was, for me, a little over a year ago, actually 14 months ago, my experience of this was when I saw a lot of safety and ethics people take it offline and meet in person and hash it out. My experience of it was rather materialist and kind of Marxist in what I saw, which is that it felt like upper middle class liberals and upper middle class libertarians fighting over whose language got to be the one to apply to describe the problems of all of humanity. That was my experience of it. They were both arguing in good faith. They were both sincere. They were largely either misunderstanding each other or using different words to describe many of the same feelings.
Yeah.
And
This
so
is why I
many,
say I
yeah,
agree. I've been in some of these conversations trying to bridge this, where there's people trying to make a new accepted word, which is like socio-technical AI safety. I think socio-technical is a word that is often overloaded and we need to find a replacement for it. But I still
I
support
don't
the
use it
movement.
anymore. Yeah, yeah.
I support the movement of it. And it's largely becoming a distribution problem where the people who represented the old side of AI ethics have such a big microphone that they're still like probably go I block them. So I don't know, but they're probably still going after people trying to hold on to their power. Where it's like the young people that need the support that are doing the good things on both sides of the safety and ethics thing that used to be the schism. It's just so it takes so long to kind of nurture that. And I think that's what the phase we're in now is. And AI safety is even like fine.
My experience with the word socio-technical, because look, you and I have written like
Yeah,
several
we have that
papers
in
where
paper
we
titles.
where we use that in the title, we use it in the paper. I even went out of my way in one of our papers to try and robustly define it, which I still think the language I used in that paper, of the axes of socio-technical inquiry in AI research paper, I still think that that's some of my best thinking on it. But I've kind of moved past it personally because I ended up coming to the conclusion that the term socio-technical ultimately defers and raises a lot more questions than answers. Because at the end of the day, I really just think you're implying that there's some kind of need to sandwich the social with the technical in a way that really just says, yeah, but is that a dynamic problem? Is it a representational problem? Is it an epistemic problem? Is it an ontological problem? And I haven't really seen any conversations along those different riverbeds move anywhere other than back to the term in ways that do seem to just rely on personal branding. And so I actually don't use it anymore in my papers or in most of my conversations. I wish luck to people who want to rehabilitate it, but I do kind of see the stakes of it, I guess, for me, ultimately are sufficiently political, not in an interpersonal sense, I just need it in a societal sense, that I would rather couch it in that space. And that takes the emphasis away, I think, from just being analytical and being research minded and more about organizationally, what are we fighting for and why?
Yeah, I do still think that having some replacement that people use would be good. I also, there's so many areas where definitions are kind of limiting AI. Because I also think the whole open source AI thing still is definitionally crippled. Where the open source initiative is going
Yeah.
and trying to make this definition of AI and open source broadly, not just language models, by doing these like working groups and talking to people who would be members. And the definition that they're arriving at like doesn't include the training data to make it so that it is an open source model. And this just makes this like, so it makes it that like Meta's models are close to being open source, but people that are truly doing open work don't have like a super definition. And so I just heard from so I just got an email from a prominent professor that was like, what's the status of this conversation? Are we really like converging on this thing that's wrong? And I was like, well, yeah, it seems like there's been no conversation. And
Yeah.
it's almost just like defeating, as we don't have the right words to guide the community in a meaningful way on distinctions that I think matter.
You know, to return to how we started this, which is like, I feel like I was reminded it probably got better socio-technical intuition from the week that I unplugged than from trying to like immerse myself in the discourse of like, oh, what are all the different ways I could think about this? And it's just like, how about I just remove myself from the technical and just see what that feels like for a week? And it was powerful. As you were talking, like this one, so I was in North Carolina, and one of the days, I'd never been there. Actually, to her credit, it was my wife's idea. We went to Kitty Hawk on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Kitty Hawk is famous, well, maybe for a few things, but by far the single thing is where the Wright brothers did their famous, tests, experiments en route to building the first human-powered, independently controlled, plane, for lack of a better word, aircraft. I'm actually wearing That's where this is from.
Yeah,
The
I
Wright
saw
brothers
that.
were at a cyclist company in Ohio, but they would go down for the winter and for the summer to Kitty Hawk to just, in this grueling way, just build an MVP. They had their idea, and they were basically building a startup. And when you go to the exhibit, when you go to where they actually did the stuff, you realize that, you feel when you're there, they had a distinctive vision for what human powered flight meant that no one else was doing, not anywhere near the level they were doing it. Everyone else, the dominant paradigm was just take, any old glider that doesn't immediately fall down and put a bigger and bigger engine on it. Like, we already have cars, just put an internal combustion engine on a glider. And basically that's flying. And the Wright brothers were like, no, that's not, that isn't going to work. It's not going to scale. And what is the reason for that? Well, they thought the reason was that really what hadn't yet been mastered, even at gliding, was control. That was their iteration. It was the fact that flying introduced these, 3 different dimensions of movement, which we might call like pitch, yaw,
Roll,
and
pitch,
roll. Exactly. And they were like, the first step is to master control over all 3 of those things. Minimize weight and just have complete understanding of those dynamics. Then you start to build in power. Then you start to build in, and of course, eventually. But the engine was like the last thing they worked on, because their intuition that they were ended up being correct was that until you basically know how to be a bird, you can't be a plane. and it was kind of beautiful for me that I think I was able to kind of just go there physically, see where they tested this stuff, imagine what it was like, see where certain flights happened. There was a totally different entry point into how you build transformative tech than if I just was on Twitter for 4 hours a day.
Well, I think this is also a difference between AI, where AI is just distributed. It's in data centers all over the world. It's like kind of digitally diffuse. And this is one of the things that makes working in modern tech dissociative and hard to grapple with, is the scale while not having anything tangible.
I think that's right. It's a theme of a lot of what our conversations have been on the pod is, and I use that word as well. Dissociative is the right word. It's organizationally dissociative and it's psychologically dissociative. That's a lot of what Haidt is talking about.
It's also just like not that easy to. It's just like it proceeds in ways that don't reward certain types of thinking, or it's not clear in how it rewards thinking. Like, we're really going to release a new model. It should be next week, that some will probably say is like by far and away our best model yet. But really, we didn't change our processes. It's like what looks like a step up in performance, like a step change, but really it's the same processes ticking away, and it just happens to get much better. And it's like, from the outside looking into these labs, they could have these huge improvements that come from the stupidest changes, and we are even casting
100%.
that as like building God and stuff. And I'm just gonna reflect on. I'm gonna write more of this up, but like the culture of these at labs is so much making bets on risk. It's like the cost in compute relative to the potential gain. And they make these really regimented bets based on compute, where compute are like their chips, and they keep making these incremental gains. And then sometimes it is perceived as these giant steps. And it's just like, why? Like, this is just causing so much smoke and mirrors.
I think that's right. I think that's very well said. I've recently become completely convinced that it's not only smoke and mirrors, but that it's not sustainable. Previously, you and I have discussed like the material dimension of that, of like, do we actually even have enough like material resources to like keep the game going forever? I think I've even become skeptical of it on other dimensions too. I think there's parts of that game that are just at a certain point going to run dry.
Well, I've heard
when
from
or
multiple
exactly
of my
how it'll
friends
happen, I'm not sure.
that are like, oh, this frontier modeling thing, I don't think I can do another year. And I don't understand why so many people are in that. It's just very, I mean, it's probably because they perceive gain, but it's,
in what? Or
just
what
like people like Google or whatever. Or like I meet up with somebody that I knew from Berkeley that's at OpenAI, and they're like, I'm so tired. And that's like the universal response. And it's like, why has the incentives been set up in this way?
I think it's capitalism.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, yeah.
Acute capitalism.
Some kind of hyper feedback intensive version of it. But I think this is exactly right. It's funny that we often, Haidt's book is about, it's literally the anxious generation. But the people who are tasked with building and defending and doing these risks day after day after day are also experiencing this kind of structural burnout. It's actually just degrading, I think, from a human standpoint, to make yourself into a slave to a business model that requires this completely arbitrary equation between scale and capability. So it's almost at a certain point not about the power law being whether or not that's the scaling laws actually existing or not, because there's an implicit human layer or lots of implicit human layers behind them that we keep acting like they're just infinite resources, and they're not. They're not. And sooner or later, that's going to start to buckle. I feel like actually probably already is starting to buckle, and you yourself are an example of that in the conversations you're having.
I find that I'm mostly becoming more excited about just writing all these ideas that I have. I have a lot of ideas, and it's like just signing off Twitter and just writing through them is going to be more interesting than what I'm doing. Like why building foundation models is weird for people. Like the rate of like how you get your payoff is really dissociative and weird from the outside. This kind of AI ethics, like what is happening in the field, and just kind of keeping track of what is going on in a clear way just seems way more appealing than a lot of the other noise that is out there, and just making sure that I'm actually thinking about the things that I'm saying. So that definitely is something that I'm trying to figure out the right systems to make sure that I have the time for. And
how much of the like Twitter addiction type stuff, not for Zoomers, I don't know if we're in a position to speculate about that because we're a bit older, but for like the AI folks, is it really just FOMO? What is the thing that keeps people just really just going back again and again and again and again? Because it requires a lot of people to keep being like, oh, I have to see what happened today. It's like, no, you don't, actually. It's just the same old crap that it's been for the last 2 years. Is it really just fear?
I think that's a crude way to describe it. I'm trying to figure out the mechanisms that are a bit more precise on what is happening. I do think a lot of it is just some latent fear of other people doing what you were planning on doing, or some like credentials on being on top of what is going on, where people respect you for knowing what is going on. Or it's like the currency of being smart and having good takes is higher again because the whole valuation of the ecosystem is higher. So like people get more dopamine from being from these hits because everything is just anteed up.
Yeah, it does just strike me as like perceived comparison. Yeah, at scale. And so I don't mean to neg people. Like everyone feels fear and anxiety. Again, we're kind of circling back to Haidt again. These emotions are universal. The question is, do you want those emotions to be your moral foundations? Because I don't. I would like there to be different moral foundations that fundamentally guide the decisions about how my life is structured, at least how my days are structured. But those don't exist right now. We don't seem to have the platforms or the infrastructure for it.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what people's incentives exactly are. Because I think my incentive is to have good process on the technical work, and then I'm obviously putting a lot of emotional energy into crafting my writing practice, almost in a meditative, it's not Zen in the meditative sense, but it is very much a practice and is in a yoga practice or a meditation practice. Just keep being, itch away at the skills. So I have a bit of a different incentive than most people in the field, because I'm just trying to grow something independent to my day job. My job obviously supports it, but I really want to have the skill and keep doing it, which makes it a little bit easier. And there's obviously extracurriculars like trail running or whatever that I'm doing that keep me in line. But without those, if it is only the technical, it's there's this feeling of the technical being so random when you get your progress and so weird. And if that's the only thing that people have really to buy into, I don't really understand the
it's deeply unhealthy
nature of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have a hard stop actually pretty soon. What gives you hope? Or even joy? Let's just restrict it to joy. Like right now.
I enjoy being in person with people that I get along with. That's technically mostly through work, but that is much better than what I was doing being online. It's just way more grounded, and at least you're building some sort of relationships than just along the way of whatever we're building.
I enjoy barbecue. North Carolina barbecue is very good. And also like the new generation of barbecue places that are really top ranked. It's interesting. They have this like, we also have Mississippi barbecue. So have Austin barbecue. We also have, which is a little bit, I'm sure if you were truly native to those places, it would offend you. But it's when you try it, you're like, shit, there's some really good mix of stuff out there. So I was very impressed, and I would recommend anyone who can to enjoy barbecue while the summer is still not quite over yet.
Yeah, it's a good reminder. People go touch grass. You can tell us what you're doing. mail@retortai.com. Tell us how you're touching grass out there and unplugging. And
Get joy.
Yeah, find joy in AI things. I do think building products is a better way to joy. It's just so much more tractable than chasing AGI.
Amen to that. All right. We will be back into a groove. We'll figure it out. We'll see you guys soon. You'll hear us soon.
Anyway, bye-bye.
Bye for now.